Go anywhere you want, but stay in Christian author, please.
Okay, so he's had some ruffles here the last few years on his end time theologies, but this book isn't about that. God and Government by Gary DeMar is a pretty phenomenal book when you're looking at the Christianization, how the country was founded, how the Constitution came into shape under Presbyterians and Baptists. 98% of all founding fathers either were Presbyterian or Baptist. Like it's an insane pushback on this kind of secular pagan atheist, like we weren't a Christian nation. Like stop. Like, you know, the king over in England called the revolution to the Presbyterian revolt, for crying out loud. The first 13 colonies were all set up under either Presbyterian or Baptist churches. Like we were so ingrained in Christianity.
Welcome to Grounded, a podcast for restoring the church to a biblical foundation. I'm Steve Hartland, and it occurs to me from time to time when I say this is a podcast for restoring the church. It's pretty big, the church, to a biblical foundation. Sounds a little pretentious. Maybe we should modify it for helping restore the church to a biblical foundation, for encouraging the church out there back to a biblical foundation, to restoring some parts. I don't know what, but anyway, that's what we are. We're a podcast for restoring the church to a biblical foundation. We want to see Christ as the head. We want to honor Christ. We want to see the church based on Scripture and what Christ says in Scripture to himself and through his apostles. We want a biblical church. So that's what we're here for. I have a guest today. You all would laugh if you knew how many times he and I, my guest, his name is Greg Moore, how many times we tried to make this podcast happen and how many times, I don't know what it was, the demons of the internet or what, just prevented us. This is our third try, isn't it? Am I right? Yeah, number one didn't work for XYZ reasons, number two for ABC reasons. We finally got everything working here. The Lord is with us. Greg Moore is, let me give you some bio. He's a small business owner, a real estate broker, has been county commissioner in Monroe County, Michigan. I looked at that on Google Maps this week. Where is that? Okay, I got you. You've been county commissioner since 2016. Monroe, let's see, that's Monroe County is about a half hour. Where you are is about a half hour south of Detroit, I think. Does that sound right? Yep. Okay. I looked around. It's beautiful out there, by the way. I kind of want to live there now that I've seen it. And you're right on Lake Michigan or close to it.
Lake Erie.
Lake Erie. All right. I assumed that was Michigan. What do I know about the lakes? By the way, I've been to Cleveland. How far are you from Cleveland?
I'm about 2 hours until you smell it, and then about a half hour till you step in it.
Another half hour. Is it that bad? So, short story. Here's why I was in Cleveland. I was shopping for a motorcycle, and I found the one I wanted, and a guy in Cleveland owned it. And so I asked him, swear to me, bro, swear to me, if I fly up there, it's going to be what you're telling me it is. Because if I fly up there and you didn't tell me about something, I'm not going to be happy. Flew up there, paid him cash, bought it, rode it all the way back to Baltimore. Got caught in massive thunderstorms up in the mountains of western PA in Bedford County near Pittsburgh. I'm standing under overpasses going like this, freezing, jumping up and down because I was too dumb to have any wet weather gear. Great day in my life, brother.
I once bought a Infinity car off of eBay to flip when I was like in my early 20s in New York. So I drove from Michigan to New York. I said, can I test drive it? He said, yeah. I test drove it around the little borough there, 35, 40 miles an hour, bought it, got on the expressway and realized it wouldn't get out of third gear. So the transmission was shot on it. And I went 45 miles an hour at about 5,000 RPMs all the way back from New York City to Detroit. That was fun.
What a trip. Sorry to hear it. I'm going to move on in the bio. You're also, I like this, you're a drummer. I'm a used to be drummer. I am officially now no longer a drummer. Although once in a while I sneak into the church when nobody's here and I go up in the drum cage and I play some drums.
Are you ever not a drummer though, Steve? Really? You might just not actively play, but I mean the drummer is in the DNA. You're always tapping, you're listening to tempo, you're a drummer.
Oh, I am always tapping. I'm drumming on things. I'm talking to my wife about drumming. Oh, I like the way he played that part.
Yeah.
So it's like being a Marine, right? Once a Marine, always a Marine.
Once a drummer, always a drummer. Yeah.
All right. So you're a drummer. You're also a podcaster. His podcast, my guest, Greg Moore's podcast, is the Dead Men Walking podcast. How cool is that? Check it out. Exploring theology, doctrine, culture, and politics. You want to say anything more? What's your podcast about? Because we want to push them.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, it is not a zombie podcast. Get a lot of that. People going, hey, you talking about zombies? No, it's in Ephesians 2. We're dead in our trespasses. You know the verse well. I just love that juxtaposition of dead in our trespasses, and now Christ has raised us to high and priestly places. So that's what it's based off of. We talk about culture, politics, doctrine, theology, all through a Reformed biblical Christian worldview, and anything that interests me that week. So anywhere from congressmen and comedians to theologians and scholars.
Yeah, very good. You're a small business owner. What's that?
What is that, or how is that?
Yeah, what business?
No, the real estate. So I have some agents,
okay.
Real estate broker, Covenant Real Estate. Been doing that for almost 15 years now. Before that, I was in the corporate world for about 10 years. And, went into real estate kicking and screaming. But by the providence of God, he knew it was best for me. And I don't know if I will ever go back to working for someone else unless the Lord absolutely sends me there.
Yeah, may he deliver you from that. Yeah. Before we get into our topic, we haven't even told our guests yet what our topic is. They're all waiting. But I wanted to ask you, so the recent election, man, you're a county commissioner in Monroe County, Michigan. Recent elections. Is this going to change your life at all, your work life, what you're doing there?
I don't know if it will change it awfully too much. I do know it probably will be a positive. In 2017 and 18, President Trump invited 50 county commissioners and township supervisors down to the White House to meet him and his staff and some of his secretaries. And he was the only president that had ever done that and has ever done it since. And we got to sit down with him for a few minutes. And then for the rest of the 8 hours, over 2 days, talk to, the Department of Energy and National Intelligence. And they basically said, what are we doing at the federal level that is affecting you guys to do your job effectively at the local level? What regulations could we take back? How can we help you guys? And that was really the first time that locals had gotten any type of interest from the federal government to go, hey, what are we doing wrong? How are we screwing up? And it was very encouraging. And we saw Trump cut for every regulation made, on average, 3 regulations cut. So I think that's why we saw some economic prosperity there when the government stepped away. So I'm hoping to see more of that under the Trump administration. I really, truly believe in limited government, local government. The federal government is too big. It's actually one of the books that we might be talking about here later that I really like. And it was encouraging. So yeah, don't 100% agree with all of his policies, his personal life, but I do like the fact that he understands that local government, local community is the most important. It moves the rudder the quickest. It's the one that has the most effect on your life. And it's one of the reasons why I like that kind of local autonomy as a county commissioner.
Yeah, if things go well here, we just might be seeing a lot more local autonomy on various fronts. So It's encouraging. Yeah, Department of Education, for example, for a major, huge example. We'll see how that goes. All right, our topic for today, we've kept the listeners waiting long enough. We are going to talk about our favorite books. As you can see behind Greg, he likes some books. As you can't see behind me, I also like some books. We're book guys, and we thought, hey, we could have a good episode if we talk about books. We're going to talk about our favorite books. And if you're not a book person, you're not a book reader, stay tuned. I think you're going to enjoy this. Doesn't mean you have to read them. Some people are more readers. Some people are more doers. We need all the above. It's the body of Christ. We need every member, so bless the Lord. But you got 2 guys who are booky guys here. We like to read things, and we're talking about what we've read, and I think you're going to find it interesting and edifying. Before we name our first book, I'm going to ask Greg to name what's your favorite all-time book of all time, besides the Bible, of course. I'm going to ask you first, have you always been a reader? If not, when did you start reading? What made you start reading? Tell us.
Honestly, yes. And just because probably my mother and my father really instilled that in me. I was homeschooled in the 80s, which was back when social services would come knock on your door and say, hey, we're taking your kids to jail. Why aren't they in school?
My wife and I were homeschooling in the 80s.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you understand.
We had people in our church mad at me. You're breaking the law.
Oh, same thing.
Yeah.
And really, honestly, that story is kind of funny itself. I was the only kid in second grade is when I got pulled because we had a story about a man stealing bread from a market to feed his family. And they said, is it right to steal if you're hungry? And the whole class said, well, yeah, you got to feed your family. And I stood up as a second grader. I said, no, it's wrong to steal. There's other ways he could have tried to figure out to provide for his family. And I got sent to the principal's office. And my parents pulled me and said, yeah, we're not doing this subjective morality in 1989. And so that tells you right there how long this kind of thing has been going on. But yeah, my mom read to us every night. My dad read to us every morning through Proverbs, 31 Proverbs, in the book in 31 days in a month. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's providence. And so really loved the idea of going somewhere else in your mind. I mean, it was, and then you'd watch movies even as a young kid and you go, man, that Robin Hood cartoon isn't nearly as good as the Robin Hood that mom read me, right? Because the classics are just classics and they're great. So yeah, kind of instilled. And then also, yeah, I'm a curious guy. I love the internet. I love books. I love asking why. And I'm sure you're the same way. Why does that work that way? Why are we doing that? Why has that happened? Why did that happen in history? And a good way to do that
is what really happened here. I know what they're saying, but I want to know what's the other side of that issue say.
100%. Let's know every side of the issue. So always been into reading. I've probably recently in the last 5 or 7 years gone to a lot of listening, which my wife and I get into debates on that. I'm not allowed to say I read a book if I listened to it on Audible or she will.
I've seen some real fine world-class scholars say I read a book when they meant listen to it.
Well, I'll get gently corrected, lovingly corrected. Honey, you listened to that. You didn't read that. So, because she's a reader too. And I'll tell you what, when we were moving a few years ago, I said, when two readers get married, that is a heavy move. I said, why weren't we both interested in like feathers or something or stamps or
where are you going to put all the books?
Something less heavy to move all these books.
So here's another question. Some of our listeners are probably like, man, I'd like to read more, but I don't know when I'd fit it in. By the way, you can fit it in if you listen to a book while you drive, if you listen to a book while you're at the gym. I never, at the gym, I listen to music, I listen to podcasts. It just hit me. I got to start listening to some books when I'm on that treadmill.
Yeah.
Some books that I think it would be okay to listen to that one. But when do you fit in reading? Because everybody's busy and they want to know, how do you make that a part of your life? What do you do?
Oh, well, you'll do anything you prioritize, right? I mean, I've made these excuses with God. Oh, I didn't have time for my prayer time or for my Bible reading time. It's like, yeah, but you did 5 other things that you could have done instead of that you found more important: an extra long lunch, binging something on Netflix, right? Like, you just prioritize. So if you're a reader or you're not a reader and you go, I want to be a reader, you go, okay, I'm setting aside this time to read or to listen. In the car is a great way too, just like you said. Just went on a family trip out to Lake Michigan and we listened to the original Pinocchio, which is much different than with young kids too. It's a little dark, but my kids are older now. But so you find time, right? You like, if I'm in a car for 2.5 hours, that's 2.5 hours I can listen.
Yeah. But all right, what time do you find? When do you make it happen?
It's the evenings, for sure.
Evenings.
Yeah, relaxes
So
me.
it's like you had dinner, the household settled down. At 7 o'clock, you sit down and read a while?
Just about that time, 7.
That's exactly what I read.
7 o'clock, and then the kids are getting...
I have a job. I'm busy all day. I can't read what I want to read. I got to read what my job demands me to read during the day. Nighttime, here's what I want to read.
I'll give you a little life hack too, which I know this sounds dumb, but people go, man, I have trouble sleeping. I might sit down with my phone and watch a YouTube clip or something. And that blue light, man, will keep you up. I'll tell you what, all you have to do is put a book in front of you, and after about a half hour, 45 minutes, I'm sleepy, I'm ready to go to bed. So I think it's, it's a natural way to unwind as well too, to relax, have a reading chair in the bedroom and sit there and read, and then, good to go.
Sweet. Hey, about that blue light thing. So I got my device here and I got it rigged so it really diminishes the blue light and turns things more like yellow at a certain time in the evening. I don't remember what time it does that, but click, it suddenly goes different colors. So I'm not seeing blue light for quite a while before I go to bed.
Wow, I didn't know. Is that a setting on the phone?
Yes, it is.
I'll have to figure that out. All right.
Yeah, Google that.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see. Another question here. Does everybody need to be a reader? Like, I don't think so. You don't think so either, right? Why not? Why not?
Okay, let me tell you something though. You retain more when you read. I saw this chart when I was in college, and I don't know how true it is or not, but it did the percentages of what you retain, right? Something that you speak about, you might retain 10%. Something you speak and see, 20%. Something you read, 30%. Something you read and do is about 60% retention. And then something you read, do, and then teach to someone else is about 90% retention. So I found when I listen to something, I'm not retaining nearly as much as if I read something. So if it's an important subject, I'm probably going to try to get the text on that, right? If it's a classic that I've already read and I'm just revisiting, I might listen to it. If it's a fluff podcast or something that goes, that might be interesting and it's not too heady, I might listen to it. But man, if it's a subject that I really want to retain and learn about, I'm probably going to read. So I would say you don't have to be a reader, but it's really like, how much do you want to retain and learn from that? Some people read just for entertainment. I've gotten away from fiction, but man, early in our marriage, my wife and I got into a series of books and it was like obsessive. It was a 30 series book. It was fiction. It was about a detective and it was like one after another, right?
Did you read them all? 30?
We got to about 20 and we got convicted because there was some stuff that main character was doing in there. And we go, it's just not, it'd be the same as watching an R-rated movie not being edifying. So we went, no, we're good. Yeah. So it took us about 20 books though. That's how good they were.
Not bad. Incidentally, just for the record, since you bring up reading novels and stuff, I rarely read nonfiction. I mean fiction anymore. I just have too much stuff I want to read
Yeah.
that's nonfiction. But just recently, I wanted some like R&R. I wanted to give my brain some R&R in reading. And so I picked up a book I read. Let's see, I'm 70. I was probably 25, that long ago. And it's Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment.
Oh, wow.
Man, that's an awesome story.
Yeah.
But it's kind of dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's funny
kinda
is my kind of brain fluff reading is like an Agatha Christie novel.
That's great.
Which
Yes, sir.
people who don't read go, oh my gosh, Agatha. And it's like, it's written very easily. It's very easy to understand. My 13-year-old loves Agatha Christie. They've read a few of those. So it's like, that's one where I kind of like crime mystery. You know, I was a big Columbo fan, Murder, She Wrote, Maddox.
Columbo, yes.
I mean, just think of all of them. I'll watch all those dumb, stupid murder mystery ones. I don't know why. Like, I just like the clue, the mystery, you know? But Agatha Christie's one to where I think is well written, or even Sherlock Holmes, I think is pretty digestible.
They're
Wouldn't you
awesome.
say?
They're great to watch, too. Watch one of the Sherlock Holmes series or the Agatha Christie, the character Hercule Poirot.
Yeah.
Oh, man, he's awesome. My wife and I just watched one of the series with Poirot. It was really excellent.
Yeah.
By the way, you mentioned, what's his name? The disheveled detective.
Columbo. Peter
Columbo.
Falk. Yeah.
That true or false? That's actually R.C. Sproul, right?
Well, if he was wearing a seersucker suit, you know, and had a
Have you watched R.C. Sproul?
Yeah.
I saw R.C. at a conference. We got to get to talk about books here soon, but I saw R.C. at a conference, and the only time I've ever heard him speak live. It was awesome. He comes walking out, and he has this like disheveled raincoat on, like Columbo did. And here's what he did. He starts reaching in this pocket and that pocket like he's searching for his piece of paper. And after a while, he found it, and he gets out this very folded piece of paper, and he unfolds it, sits it on the podium. It curls up again because it had been folded. He pushes it down. And then he never even looked down at it. He started talking, and he never looked at the paper once.
Oh, that's you know what's funny
great.
is I've said that for years because I say grow up, but I mean in my early 20s, watching a lot of that like late 70s to mid 80s R.C. Sproul. He's in the red, you know, when he's doing his stuff for the college students with the fro and the seersucker suit, the professor.
Yeah, the fro.
And I always looked at it, I went, he does look a lot like Peter Falk and Columbo. Someone needs to make a fun Christian sketch about that.
That'd be
Columbo
awesome.
Sproul.
Create a video
Yeah.
where it's Columbo, but it's R.C. Sproul talking. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, one more
All right,
thing, sir. Excuse me. What's your thoughts on Credo Baptist? Yeah.
Yeah, like that. All right, we got to talk about some books. So here we go. Your house is on fire. May it never be. Your house is on fire. Your Bible's already out in your truck. So your Bible's out of there. Okay, so you got time. You get your wife and your kids out. You got your dog out. You got time to grab one book, man. You're one book. It's like going to be your favorite ever book. You got to have it. You've marked it up. You don't want to part with that copy.
Okay, that's different than my favorite book, though.
Is that different? All right, well then don't do my thing. Tell us
tell
your
you
favorite
both.
book. I'm going to tell you the one I'd grab if the house is
Which one
burning
would
down.
you grab?
But you go ahead. What's your favorite book of all time?
Probably just to go back and read is probably Screw Tape Letters.
Huh.
Just there's so many nuggets of like, yes, that's so true on how the flesh distracts us from the work of Christ or
Pause there a second. I'm sorry, Greg. All our hearers might not know what that is. Give us a short. What is Screw Tape Letters?
Oh, it's a
Who wrote it and what's it about?
C.S. Lewis wrote it. And it's a series of letters from a kind of head demon to Screw Tape, his nephew, and he's telling him how to essentially distract and subvert and basically keep a non-believer in non-belief, some daily things he can do, distract him with hunger, right? And then it goes to the subject becomes saved, and then it's how we can kind of keep him down in a way from realizing his full potential. And there's just a lot of real things in there. And it's kind of tongue in cheek, but it also, and it's a light read and a fun read. And I know that's not a lot of people's favorite book, but you read.
But that would be a good book for a lot of people who say, I'm just not a reader.
100%.
Try Screw Tape Letters.
100%. Yeah. You know, then you can graduate to like a Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis if you want to go in that vein. So a lot of people are surprised when I say it's one of my favorite, but I think you can really go back and read that a few times and go, oh, I've done that in my life. I understand what that is when I should be in prayer and my stomach growls. The next thing I know, I'm in the fridge and I'm eating and I'm fulfilling something of the flesh, which is, there's nothing wrong with being hungry, right? But if you make it your idol and you go, I would rather do that than be in prayer or in the word or ministering the gospel or whatever it is, you go, those are real world ways that the flesh really can defeat us. And I've always just found C.S. Lewis's his illustrations and the way that he kind of describes things. Although we don't agree on everything theologically, I think he's one of the most prolific writers in being able to take real big, weighty subjects and kind of reduce them into light, digestible bites, which I think, a lot of even non-readers will find really nice.
Agree with everything you said. We don't agree with him on everything, but man, I love him. What a brilliant guy. What a gift to the church. What an amazing man. When my wife and I were newly married, and then when we had kids, we read them all of the Chronicles of Narnia and all this good C.S. Lewis stuff. We went through a C.S. Lewis phase where we burned through all this stuff. But you'll be interested to know, a young lady named Tilly Delahaye recently wrote a take on Screw Tape Letters, and we got to interview her about that book. It's a book. Canon Press has produced it. And guys, I'm getting a glitch. What's the name of that book? Dear Hemlock. That's right, because the senior tempting demon. Actually, the demons in this case are female, and the temptee is female.
Right.
So Dear Hemlock, highly recommend the book. She did a really, really fine job of that. I read it for the interview with her and thoroughly enjoyed it. So that's your favorite book. Let's go back to my question just to see what happens. So the house is on fire, and you're going to run back in and grab one book. What is it and why?
Probably the Christian Institutes.
I'm there with you, bro. That's my number two choice. What is the Christian Institutes?
By Calvin. Pretty well known, but going just as it says. I read that in probably my late 20s, and I went, where has this been my entire life? Why hasn't anyone in church ever told me about this? Who's this Calvin guy? I think I've heard of him. And Calvin and Hobbes, is that the same guy? And funnily enough, it is based on that. Probably just because I'm a big reference book guy too, which doesn't make me very fun, but I love reference and ordered and dictionary and.
Have you ever read through a dictionary? I heard Doug Wilson say he actually read through a dictionary.
I used to when I was little.
Did you?
I would just go through and go, "What's that word? What does that mean?" Yeah, exactly. Not so much anymore, and I probably should just because words are fascinating and how they change and meanings change. We see that, but that would probably be one where that's when you go back to once every 6 months and you just reread or you grab a chapter out of it. But yeah, if my house was burning, probably something like that. Maybe Truce We Believe by Sproul. That's another good reference. Another one that I like is a Dictionary of Early Christian Beliefs by David Berceau. Not very well known, but phenomenal research book that just goes back and by every subject you can imagine, right? Homosexuality, abortion, tithing, Holy Spirit, where you look up the word and he'll give you 4 to 5 pages on this is what Tertullian believed. This is what Augustine believed. This is what Justin Martyr was talking about.
Sweet.
Very, very cool book.
I'm going to have to copy that name down. So let's go back to John Calvin a minute. It's the 1500s. He's in Geneva, and God's giving Reformation and even a measure of revival there. And he wrote this book, The Institutes. It's a systematic theology when he had barely any shoulders to stand on. That's one of the amazing things about Calvin's Institutes. But it's not just that he had very little to work from. It's also, by the way, if you buy his Institutes, I highly recommend you get the Ford Lewis Battles editor version. There are different. Okay. There are a couple different editors. So just for our hearers' sake, but he had nobody's shoulders to stand on, and yet it is amazing theological precision. And I don't agree with them on everything. I'm a Baptist. I'm not a Paleo Baptist, for example. But it's also beautiful. He writes with beauty, and it's pastoral. It's warm-hearted. It's not just facts poured out on a page. And he's a master with words. So I like it because it's just exquisite and it's beautifully exquisite. So John Calvin, man. Yeah. Yeah.
What were your two? So what's the one you love the most and the one you'd grab when you're running out of the burning building?
Actually, coming in here today, I was thinking, it's actually a toss-up. My first one and my second one. I'm not sure which one of these I would go with. But I thought my first one that I'd grab in the fire is Augustine's Confessions.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so we're late 300s here. 300s, way back to the 300s. Augustine is undoubtedly one of the shoulders that John Calvin stood on, right? And some other church fathers. But so why do I love Augustine so much? Well, what he wrote is just absolutely brilliant. It's also beautifully written. That just appeals to me. I really like something that's written with amazing skill that makes it beautiful. And It's sublime. It's just clever. My criticism of Augustine, we should criticize these authors too, by the way. What would you say negative about him? Well, one, there's enough in Augustine that the Roman Catholics can claim him as a champion, and there's enough in Augustine that Protestants can claim him as a champion. In other words, he wasn't quite clear on some things that he needs to be. Augustine, by the way, is also probably for the serious reader. Don't try to listen to him on the treadmill. Don't try to listen to him driving through D.C. traffic. We live near Washington, D.C., kind of. Some of us go down there sometimes. It's for the serious reader, but man, it's good. What do you think, Augustine? Have you read Confessions?
I have not read it all the way through. I started it, and I probably should get back to it. So I'm going to take your word on that. I do know, even when you look at subjects, though, that we're arguing about on Twitter X or that churches are arguing about, you go, guys like Augustine address those, 1,800 years ago or whatever. It's 1,700. It's with brilliance. And you go, oh, Ecclesiastes is right. There is really nothing new under the sun. We just keep recycling these new words and new thoughts. And we think, oh, deconstruction, we've come to this thing. Or, even look at guys like Leighton Flowers, who's been on the podcast. And
he's been on your podcast?
Yes.
You guys debate Calvinism?
We didn't debate it. I allowed him to go, what brought you out of Calvinism, and didn't give him a whole lot of pushback on it, but let him have his 15 minutes. We were at a conference together, but I'm just saying, in provisionism. Oh, I got this new word. And you're like, well, we've been talking about these things for 1,000, 2,000 years, and there really is nothing new. And you don't realize how much we pull from Augustine, right?
Yes.
Until you go back and read it and you go, oh, this was something the early church was talking and debating about and kicking heretics out of.
Yes. And by the way, for the listener, Augustine's Confessions is a biography. He wrote other stuff that's not biographical, but it's a biography. It's his life, and it's amazing. He was not a believer. He was a scoundrel. He was a bad dude. And then the Lord in sovereign providence saved him, sovereign prerogative saved him, and how he changed and what he became and then what he believed and so on and how he acted. It's just a really wonderful biography of one of the great godly men of all church history. All right, so we've talked about Augustine, Calvin.
Well, that's the one that's your favorite, or that's the one you'd pull out of the burning?
Augustine is the one I'd grab first in the fire. And then if I realize, all right, the roof didn't cave in yet, I can run back in and grab one more thing, it would be Calvin's Institutes.
Okay, cool.
So I read those. I'm probably 30 couple years old. I'm a pastor out in Riverside, California. We had 4 kids and some foster kids. After the whole family, this is my only time I could find to read. I'm rebuilding our house. We bought a complete wreck because we could afford it. And now I'm rebuilding. When we got it all done, we sold it and didn't make much profit, by the way.
Right.
Because the market had taken a dive. But anyway, so I have a photo of me sitting at the dining table reading at like 1:30 a.m. because that was my reading time then. The family finally went to bed, maybe 10 o'clock. Now I can sit down and read what I want to read. And so from 10 to 12, 1:30, I'd read then. You ever had a time where you had to read late at night like that?
Oh, man, my 20s and early 30s, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning and you're like, I got to get up at 6. You're like, that's a solid 4 hours. I'll be okay. No more.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm 43 and it's like, I need, past midnight, you're like, geez.
Yeah.
But oh, no. When I had 2 little ones, all my kids are about 2 years apart. We had a nice little rhythm, new every 2, we call it. So I had, for a while there, I had, 3 toddlers running around. Yeah, you get them down and you go, I'm going to be up, changing a diaper or rocking them back to sleep anyway. I might as well stay up and read. So yeah, there were some times where it was late at night like that.
Yeah, it was late at night. All right, so we've talked about those. Who was your first one? It was C.S. Lewis. So we have on the table, we got C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape Letters. We got the great Augustine, his Confessions, and the great John Calvin, his Institutes. What do you got next? What do you want to talk about? One of your favorites?
One of the ones that I just recently became aware of in the last few years, and I don't know if you know too much about this gentleman, but it's called God's Wisdom in Proverbs by Dan Phillips.
I don't know a thing about him, so you got to tell us about him.
Yeah, what he does is do I have the book out here? I don't know. I'm looking behind me for those listening. But
if you got one right there, show it. No, don't worry about it then.
I can't find it. It might be behind me. Or no, it's actually upstairs on my nightstand. I brought it in a few weeks ago. So he goes through, because I love Proverbs. Oh man, my father did Wisdom in Proverbs,
Dan Phillips.
Yeah. So read a proverb every morning. Like I said, 31 proverbs, 31 days in a month, in most months. Read your proverb every morning. And he takes Proverbs and he really digs into what the original meaning was, the context. He uses a really good hermeneutic to go, okay, how are we misinterpreting this? Because he starts the book out going, Proverbs is probably one of the most misinterpreted. We use a lot of Proverbs as like promises and salvific promises and things like that. Even down to the fact of, there was a lot of Proverbs that was quoted to me from the pulpit as a kid. And then you grow up and you go, well, that's not what that means. We've all heard the proverb, raise up a child in the way that he should go, and from that way he won't depart. And you go, oh, if we teach him about the Lord and get him saved, and it's a salvific promise, he'll never depart. And that's not what the proverb means at all. Originally translated, and Dan Phillips points this out very quite nicely, is allow a child to continue in the way that he should go, meaning in his sinful, selfish, depraved state. If you allow a child to do that, he's not going to depart from that when he's older, because you're setting habits in that child at a very young age.
Whoa, no, I've never heard that. No, I agree with you totally. It's not. I thought it was a general promise, but not a conveyor belt. If you put them on the belt, they'll come out godly. But no, he's saying
if you go to King James, you go to original translations, even LSB and NASB, the verse is, raise up a child in a way that they should go, or the way that they want to go. The word there's to want to naturally go in their depravity, in their sinfulness. You're going to have a real hard time bringing them back from that when they're older, because you've set the form and the concrete has been laid. And you go, oh, that's not a promise of salvation. It is a direction from a wise man saying, hey, look, I've been around a long time. I've had a lot of kids. You've got, conversely, we do train them in the ways of God and his character and his principles. But what it's saying is, don't be that parent that just allows a kid to do whatever they want naturally, because what they naturally want is sinful and fleshly and depraved, and they're going to go that way. So be the parent that sets the guidelines and the guardrails and keeps them out of the ditches. And we believe as believers that is the gospel, right? To bring up a child with the character of God. So that's just one example, but it kind of opens your eyes to, wow, there's a lot of Proverbs that I call it Christianese. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Which I did a whole episode on the Dead Man Walking podcast on just these Christian sayings that we have and Bible verses that we throw around. Where two or more are gathered, the Lord is present. Well, that's church discipline. Yeah. We're not talking about two people coming together asking for a lot.
Not having dinner at your house on Friday night.
Right. Yeah. So he does a lot of that to Proverbs. And I just found this book, I think about 2 or 3 years ago. And it's almost like more like reference. He goes through every proverb and every proverb within each chapter and kind of dissects it.
So tell me, about how many pages total is the book? Rough guess.
Oh, it's not in front of me, but I think it's about 250.
250. So he covers all 31 proverbs. About how many pages per proverb then? Like what I'm getting at is, if you're going to read through the Proverbs one a day for a month, which is a great practice. I've done that many times. I'm not currently doing it. Can you read Proverbs chapter 1, and then can you read him at the same time and handle it?
You could, but he jumps around. So it's not like chapter 1 is Proverbs 1.
Okay.
It's more subject by subject. So once that goes into my trend of, I really gravitate almost towards like reference type books.
No, the reference book. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where I can go in and go, okay, we're talking about love. Oh, chapter 3 is on all the Proverbs on love or loving something. So it's kind of that way. So I don't know if you could read it as a companion. But I found it very interesting just because I love Proverbs in general. And then you have someone going, okay, let's actually, we take a lot of Proverbs and they're just fortune cookie proverbs, right? They're just kind of these sayings, and then words change, meanings change, and then we kind of put it in our head. We've heard it so many times. You would be surprised how many Christians think that you reap what you sow is equivalent to what goes around comes around. And you go, hold on. That Christianese doesn't work. Like, one is Eastern mysticism saying, hey, it's all autonomous out there flying around. Sometimes it comes, sometimes it goes around. To where reaping what you sow means what you put into work, that's what comes out of the ground. What you're working towards, that's the result. Two totally different concepts. And we do that a lot with Proverbs, a lot of Christian Bible verses. So that's why I like that book.
Cool book on Proverbs. All right, I'm going to move us on here. So my next one, I'd like to mention Martin Luther, kind of moving chronology in chronology with mine. So you got Augustine, then you got Calvin, and at the same time as Calvin, pretty much, you got Martin Luther. And Martin Luther really doesn't make it onto my reading list. I've read some Luther. I'm not real hot about anything there. But I love the man. I love the role. God raised up this big, bombastic, he's like a Donald Trump in Christendom, big, bombastic, wrecking ball kind of a man. And you needed that to launch the Reformation, to stand up to the Pope and everything. Furthermore, Luther is hilarious. What I have read more of it in Luther than anything is his table talks.
Yeah.
Table talks is he would have a lot of people for dinner all the time. His wife would put this dinner on. They got 5 guests, 9 guests, whatever, and they would talk. And Luther would talk, and several guys were over there taking down notes of everything Luther said in these table talks. And he is the most hilarious, the most crazy guy in those table talks. So I'd recommend that. What I don't like about Luther is it's going to be a theme here. He's not Baptist. Are you Baptist? I'm Baptist.
I was currently Reformed Presbyterian, but functionally growing up in a non-denominational church, probably Baptist light. So just 4 years ago, started attending a Reformed Presbyterian church, which, I had the question of baptism in my mind for 15 years, but I'd never been taught anything different. Didn't really understand. Just thought, hey, look, you have a profession of faith and then you get baptized. That's just the way it works in the Western Christian church.
Right.
Didn't really get into covenant theology or understanding what that means. What really messed me up was, repeating a prayer at 7 years old and being saved, but then having to wait till I was 13 to get baptized. And that really confused me as a young kid. Now, I'm not saying we should take erroneous traditions and base then our hermeneutic on that, right? Our theology on that. But that was one where you went, what's going on there?
So just for the listeners here, if you'll permit me a little bit of shameless self-promotion, we turned out a grounded episode kind of recently on this whole issue, Paedo Baptist versus Credo Baptist, and I would encourage you all to listen to it. I liked it. I thought it went pretty well. It's a solo episode. It's just me talking. Sorry, I don't have a guest, but check it out, listeners, if you'd like. And so there's Luther. I wish he had been a Baptist. Also critical of him is some of his stuff really could be taken as anti-Semitism and may have helped lead Germany into a position of anti-Semitism. That's debatable. But I would bypass Luther. He's not really on my list today. I just had to give him honorable mention.
Yeah.
My next guy would be, it's a toss-up. It's either John Owen in the 1600s or Jonathan Edwards in the 1700s. Two great guys. I'm going to leave them on the table for a minute. Would either of those make your list?
I'm probably more of a Knox guy, just because I'm involved in politics too.
Oh,
John
why?
Knox was, he was, not only was he theologically sound, but such a political strategist and understanding how to use monarchs to his advantage. And
what was his date and where did he live?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that.
Do I need to ask Siri real quick?
Yeah, do the Google, because I think it's us.
Hey Siri, when did John Knox live? Oh, I'm in airplane mode because of the podcast. It's not going to work.
Hold on.
Yeah, you find out for us.
I said I love John Knox, and I can't remember the year he was born. Sorry.
I'm going to guess he must have been what, 1400?
1514. So, yep,
okay.
Right after the 14 to 1572.
All right, John Knox. And where was he? Does it tell you right there?
Oh, well, he was Scottish. So, he was in the, Church of Scotland. But yeah, so that one, but John Owen, yeah, of course. Awesome. Jonathan Edwards, that was one of my first ones where being homeschooled, had to study Jonathan Edwards and say, oh, he wrote one of the greatest sermons of all times. But then being from a non-denominational kind of fundamentalist Baptist church, really, they were like, yeah, but we're not really going to get into his theology because he was, kind of weird in that. And you went, weird, huh? But he wrote the greatest sermon. And then in my 20s, you go, wait a minute, he was Reformed or Calvinist. And, I had this kind of come to Calvinist moment where all these guys I had learned about, the guy who wrote Pilgrim's Progress was Reformed. Wait, the guy who wrote Amazing Grace that we sing every week was Reformed. Wait a minute, the guy, greatest preacher or sermon of all time, Jonathan Edwards, Reformed. Wait a minute, Charles Spurgeon that I learned about was Reformed. Wait, and you just go on, and you go, wow, there's this crazy church history of these Reformed Calvinistic guys, Baptist and Presbyterian, that I'd only touched the tip of the iceberg with them. Yep. But yeah, Jonathan Edwards, that sermon, right?
Edwards is 1700s, New England.
Yeah.
And that sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. One of the most famous sermons. I've read it. It's been a lot of years since I read it. And I'm just going to tell you the truth. I didn't really like the sermon that much. I thought he way, way over dramatized to help you imagine what hell's like and how sinners are hanging over it. But just by a spider's web, just by a thread, you're hanging over hell and God can drop you at any time. And it really worked up people's emotions, I thought. So I would rather he just exegete a text. But hey, who am I to talk? He's Jonathan Edwards, one of the greatest men to ever rise up on American soil. So I love reading his stuff.
That's another, you bring up a really good point, Steve. So you think of all these like Reformed guys or Calvinistic guys, you think they're all very heady, intellectual. And then you realize Jonathan Edwards did use emotion.
Oh, very much.
Because a lot of us Reformed guys can rail against Pentecostalism and the abuses of emotionalism there, but you go, he had some things too, and he tried to keep it in check at his meetings too, when people were doing weird stuff emotionally. But he really used emotion as part of kind of his shtick, as his gimmick in his sermons.
And let me clarify,
which surprised me. Yeah,
him using emotion doesn't mean he yelled and screamed. He didn't do any of that. He was a very calm, very sedate preacher. In fact, we're told that, and I'm not sure if this is apocryphal or true, and I've tried to find out, and I haven't, that when he would preach, let's say it's an evening service, he would hold his manuscript in one hand and a candle in the other, and he would just read it verbatim off the page, which is like terrible preaching, but his content was so amazing, it ripped your emotions and your soul to shreds. Ultimately, by the way, his congregation got so mad at him, they kicked him out. He became a missionary out in the wilds to the Indians. Yeah. Then a college, which college was it? The college called him to be president. He went there. He got the smallpox vaccination. It killed him. The tragic life of Jonathan Edwards. Great God.
I would say move up about 150 years, and then you get into one of my favorites too, Isaac Watts. Just because as a musician and as someone who loves the song Joy to the World, and we share a birthday, which is nice, July 17th. So I like that.
Oh, that's not fair.
But I mean, wrote, what do you write?
My birthday is shared with Lyndon Johnson.
Oh, no. Wah, wah. No, prolific man in his own right. So you go from like 14 to 1800, that 400-year span. And I had so much exploring for not only books, but theology, doctrine, that church history, just in that.
A ton of Puritans in there.
Oh, Puritans. Joel Beakey's been on the podcast. He comes on once a year and we just talk Puritans.
Sweet. I've tried to get him and he put me off. He said, I'm really busy. Try me next year. All right, I get it.
We'll get you his info. You got to have him on, because
I met him at a conference and thought, oh man, I'd like to. Anyway, it didn't happen. Yeah, you mentioned.
We made a connection, so he's up in Grand Rapids most of the time, and I go up there once a year. So I physically probably see him once a year, just because I'll go visit a church or something. But yeah, Puritans. 100%. You start getting into Puritans, and you go, there are so many things we stand on their shoulders on that we don't realize. Too.
Yeah,
but all right, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
so you were at Jonathan Edwards, 1700s. Where do you go next?
I'm going to jump then all the way down to. There are lots of other Puritans I could mention, but just looking for the top of the line here. I'm going to land on Charles Haddon Spurgeon. You mentioned Spurgeon earlier, and he's the first guy I got in this list who's a Baptist. Yay, Baptist!
All right. Probably the most famous Baptist, I would say.
Yeah, probably. And
most quotable.
There's not another Spurgeon in church history. I mean, who else would be like him? It's pretty amazing, his unique makeup, and a Baptist. I love that he was faithful under pressure. I love that he was faithful through the downgrade controversy. You can read about that if you read about his life. There are biographies about him. He was an exquisitely talented preacher. You can read his sermons. They're still wonderful. I have only a 10-volume set, but there's a huge set of all his sermons. There's a 2-volume autobiography he wrote. There's another one by Ian Murray, The Forgotten Spurgeon. That's about the downgrade controversy. I'd recommend that. It's a great read, Ian Murray.
Yep.
What do I not like about Spurgeon? He died.
Right.
January 31, 1892, which, by the way, January 31, 1892, he died. I love him so much, I memorized that date.
Yeah.
And interesting to think, my grandfather and my grandmother, Hartland, were both born in that year, 1892.
Wow.
My wife's grandfather, who raised her because my wife's father died, my wife's grandfather was born in 1892. So, incidentally, my wife's grandfather, who was born in 1892, who was a godly man who led her to Christ, who shared the gospel with her, he was a Presbyterian, he catechized her.
Yeah.
But when we put a man on the moon, he would not believe it. He never believed it to his dying day. No, they didn't really put somebody on the moon. That's impossible.
Could you imagine if he was alive today in these conspiracy chat rooms and stuff? Geez, he'd be right there.
He'd be there. So, yeah, I would go to Spurgeon somewhere in there. Does he make it onto your list?
Oh, 100%. Probably one of the most quotable preachers just the gems that he said. And then on top of that, right next to the Bible on the nightstand is mornings and evenings, his devotional. I read one every morning
huge.
and every evening. So another one, maybe my whole point today on this podcast is to bring people like me who like easy stuff to read, to introduce you into heavier stuff. That's one where you just get 3 paragraphs in the morning and you go, oh, the wisdom here in the biblical understanding in these 3 paragraphs every morning and every evening. That would be one I would suggest to a lot of people too. Go get that. Obviously 365
Absolutely.
pages,
So,
one a day, morning, evening.
Yeah, pardon me, on the morning and evening. So my wife has read through that year after year after year after year after year after year after year. She could probably quote some of it to you, maybe. But anyway, I just bought a Spurgeon book for my wife and me to read devotionally. And it's one thing a day you read, but it's not morning and evening. It's another thing, but I can't think of the title. I
don't know about it. What is it?
All right. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry I did that to you.
We'll have to look
when
it
I
up.
get home, I'll look at it and text it to you. It's on my upstairs desk. So Charles had Spurgeon. We got time for one more each, brother. Who else you want to put on the table? One good author, one good book, somebody you really loved.
I mean, are we still staying within Theologian, or do you want to go somewhere else? Or
go anywhere you want, but stay in Christian author, please.
Well, okay, so he's had some ruffles here the last few years on his end time theologies, but this book isn't about that. God and Government by Gary DeMar is a pretty phenomenal book when you're looking at the Christianization, how the country was founded, how the Constitution came into shape under Presbyterians and Baptists. 98% of all founding fathers either were Presbyterian or Baptist. Like it's an insane pushback on this kind of secular pagan atheist, like we weren't a Christian nation. Like stop. Like, the king over in England called the revolution to the Presbyterian revolt, for crying out loud. The first 13 colonies were all set up under either Presbyterian or Baptist churches. Like we were so ingrained in Christianity. So Gary DeMar does a really good job on that in God and Government. And then probably in the political avenue as well. I read this 30 years ago, but it's called The Buying of Congress, which is now dated. But let's throw that one out. Let's go to Constitutional Liberty by Frederick Hayek. Not everything 100% agree in there. He's a little more libertarian than I'd like to be, but understanding what liberty is under a constitutional framework, I think that's a good read. And it's one that I go back to, probably once a year, and I'll pull a chapter out of it and just refresh on it.
Yeah, when you go back to a book once a year, that's a book you really love. That's a book that's worth rereading, right?
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis once said that the true test of the value of a book is, would you ever read it again?
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like a movie.
Yeah.
I have a question on my podcast on the Fresh 10 segment where I was asking people what your favorite movie is. And people go, I got so many, I can't pick a favorite. So I reworded it and I said, what movie have you just watched multiple times and you can go back to? And they can answer that right away. And you go, well, that's your favorite movie, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Same thing with a book when you can go back to it, let's put bookends on it. I started with C.S. Lewis, and I mentioned it earlier, though, too. I mean, Mere Christianity is one of those books that you can go back to. And I had to read that twice back to back just to get it into my dumb brain on some of the stuff that he was saying. And once again, don't agree with all the theology there. There's some stuff on free will and election that he talks about that I don't agree with.
Yes.
But when he says things like, God is sitting at a canvas and he's painting characters into this story, he can walk away and go take a break. The time doesn't move for the character on the canvas, but it does for God. That's him sitting outside of time. And you go, wow, that's a really strange.
That's pretty amazing.
It's a weird way to explain it, but it helps you wrap your head around. We are in a linear reality trapped inside of time. God is obviously outside of time, space, and matter. He can do what he wants. So he explains these things in a very fun way, a deep theological thing to where you go, makes your brain think and go, what does that really mean? Yeah. So I would say that's one I go back to quite often as well, to a more modern book.
Interesting and not at all surprising that C.S. Lewis made it onto your list twice. Screwtape Letters and then building up to Mere Christianity. Mere Christianity, for the listener, would probably fall into the category of apologetics, defending the faith, and Lewis was brilliant and really good at that. I also agree. We don't agree with him on everything, but marvelous, wonderful read and somewhat accessible.
How about you?
I'm currently reading through him, so maybe that tips me toward wanting to name him now, and that is John Frame. I just love all things John Frame, great theologian. I believe Frame is still alive, though he's no longer a professor. He's a professor emeritus instead now. I like him because he's brilliant, he's fair, he's reasonable, he's Catholic, not Roman Catholic. Catholic in the sense that he's broad, likes all true believers. He thinks well. I'm currently reading. I've read just about everything I want to by him, and I'm currently reading through his massive systematic theology. Lately, I'm not getting to read as much for various reasons. It's a hard life.
Why is that?
Hard life when you can't read as much. Just more going on.
Yeah.
Even just it's funny what can affect your reading. So my wife used to work in a grocery store in the cheese shop. She was a cheese woman. And then when COVID hit, she just quit and she hasn't gone back. So my wife is a retired woman and I'm still working. I'm a pastor. I like being a pastor. I love it. I put in lots of hours. I love putting in those hours. So my reading time is the evenings, but that's the only time she can have me. And now that she's retired, it doesn't feel right to her. And I understand if I spend every evening, all evening reading. Let me just tell you the truth. I'm so ridiculous. I'm so terrible. If I get, let's say it's a Friday, I'm off on Fridays.
Yeah.
And she's busy with grandkids. She's going to be away at grandkids, blah, blah, blah. I might read all day long.
Yeah.
With a break for lunch or something. And that's a good day.
Good
man.
day.
If I could have more of those, if I could have one of those a week. But anyway, so John Frame, I love his stuff. There are some things I don't like him on either, but we don't need to go into those. I'm going to call it to a close here, man. Greg, this has really been fun talking about this stuff. Let me just say to the listeners, thank you for being with us today. If you like what you heard, please leave us a comment, give us a like, or share us with a friend. Hope you'll join us again. Go over and check out Dead Men Walking. I want to say it again because there's another one we saw. What is it called?
Dead Men Talking.
There's a Dead Men Talking podcast. Did you know that?
That came up after mine, all right? I was first.
You didn't sue them?
There's also a Dead Man Ministries, Dead Man Walking, MAN. And we formed, I was about 3 months before him, and we joke back and forth on Twitter. I go, I got you by 3 months. He's a good guy. Check out him too. Can I ask you a quick question before we close? A pastoral question that just came up in my group chat with some other pastors.
Interesting, sure.
How long does it take you? How long should a pastor prepare his sermon each week? Because it's going on out there. It's raging on Twitter. Some guys go,
really?
40 hours. Oh yeah, it's a huge thing right now. It's 40 hours. I work, this hours, weeks. And then some pastors go, look at, if you know the word, maybe an hour or two. Is it somewhere in between? What do you personally spend as a pastor preparing your sermon each week?
Okay, that's better. What do I personally spend? Because the broad question, what time should a guy spend, is not answerable because it depends on the guy.
Yeah.
Like Charles Haddon Spurgeon would maybe Saturday night start thinking, what am I going to preach tomorrow? He'd scratch a few notes down on a piece of paper, pretty much never look at them, go into his pulpit and preach. And he could do it, and you were edified, and it was, content dense and wonderful. I couldn't do that. But currently, my lifestyle is I spend the better part of Monday in sermon prep. So let's say I get 7 good hours of sermon prep on Monday, and my objective is to have the sermon at what I call 85%, which is, of course, a guess, right? Get it to 85% on Monday. Then on Tuesday, first thing in the morning again, after I've had my personal Bible reading and some prayer time, I'm right into that sermon, and I'm going to stay in that till about 11 o'clock. So I'm in the sermon from, let's say, 6:30 to 11, and then I got to knock off because there's staff stuff coming up.
Sure.
And I won't look at the sermon again till Thursday morning. I got to create a PowerPoint from my sermon and send it off to our PowerPoint guy. And then I do a little, let's review it, let's edit it, see what I think. And then Saturday morning, it's going to get another hour, usually not more than an hour out of me. And then Sunday morning is just going to be spent looking it over, thinking about it, praying it in, so I don't have to look at my notes a whole lot. And that's my pattern. So basically, the sermon's done by Tuesday morning at 11. It's in pretty good shape. It'll get some tweaking after that.
Yeah, tweaking it.
So that's probably 10, 12 hours average. So less than I've ever spent on sermon prep. But I'm at a place in life, I've been doing this a long time, where I think I can do that. And then I can spend my Wednesdays and Thursdays pretty much on a lot of other stuff, but also on content creation for all the various media things we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think? Why do you ask him? What do you think?
Well, no, I thought that's a good answer because the guys who say they spend 10, 20, 25 hours whittling down this perfect sermon every week, you go, well, there's a lot of pastoral things you need to do in there, and then
really,
you see
it
some
must be a small church.
You see, you see some young guys, hour, and I got it ready to go, and it's like, well, I don't.
No.
It's got to be somewhere in between, right? So I love that answer.
I don't want to sit under the 1 hour guy's ministry.
Right.
Yeah.
But hey, listen, you're going to have to come on Dead Men Walking podcast, and we're going to have to talk about something because I love what you're doing on your podcast. And I appreciate you having me on today, man.
Loved it. Enjoyed it. Yeah, let's do this some more. Thank you, Greg Moore. Thank you all for listening. See you next time.